The saloon doors swung open with their familiar creak, letting in a shaft of dusty sunlight that cut through the perpetual haze of tobacco smoke. Sarah didn't look up from the glass she was polishing. 3 years in this God-forsaken establishment had taught her that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, and strangers were just another source of trouble. Her ribs ached from last night's lesson. Marcus had been in a foul mood after losing at cards, and she'd made the mistake of serving his whiskey too slowly. The bruise on her left side throbbed with each breath, a purple, black reminder blooming beneath the threadbare fabric of her dress. She'd learned to move carefully, to make herself small, to anticipate his moods like a sailor reading storm clouds on the horizon. The newcomer's boots struck the wooden floor with a different rhythm than she was used to, not the aggressive stomp of the ranch hands or the shuffling uncertainty of the traveling merchants. These steps were measured, deliberate, carrying a quiet confidence that made something long dormant stir in her chest before she crushed it down. "Whiskey," the voice said, deep but not harsh. There was a worn quality to it, like leather left too long in the sun. Sarah finally raised her eyes and immediately regretted it. The man standing at the bar was tall, with shoulders that spoke of hard work rather than just size. His face was weathered in that way that made guessing age impossible. Could have been 30, could have been 45. What struck her most were his eyes, gray like morning fog, and carrying a sadness that somehow made her own seem less solitary. She poured the whiskey with practiced efficiency, setting the glass down without meeting his gaze again. Her hands were steady despite the fear that had become her constant companion. Marcus was in the back room, going through the books, but he could emerge at any moment. Any interaction that lasted too long, any smile, any moment of connection, these were transgressions that would cost her dearly. "Thank you, ma'am," the stranger said, and there was genuine courtesy in those 2 words, a courtesy she hadn't heard in so long it almost made her flinch. She nodded and moved away, finding another glass to polish, another task to occupy her hands and keep her eyes lowered. But she could feel his presence like heat from a forge, and against her better judgment, she found herself stealing glances. He didn't drink the whiskey immediately. Instead, he studied the room with those fog-gray eyes, taking in the rough, hewn tables, the warped mirror behind the bar, the stains on the floor that no amount of scrubbing would ever remove. When his gaze returned to her, she saw him notice the way she held herself, the careful movements, the yellow-green shadow of an older bruise fading along her jawline that she'd tried to cover with her hair. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in those eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The afternoon passed in its usual rhythm. Men came and went. Sarah served drinks and dodged wandering hands with the skill of long practice. The stranger, she heard someone call him Jameson, or maybe just James, remained at the bar, nursing that single whiskey with a patience that seemed almost meditative. When Marcus finally emerged from the back room, Sarah's entire body tensed. She felt it happen automatically now, the way a rabbit freezes when it catches the scent of a wolf. Her husband was a barrel-chested man with hands like ham hocks, and a face that might have been handsome once, before whiskey and meanness had carved it into something cruel. "Who's this?" Marcus demanded, jerking his chin toward the stranger. "Just passing through," James said before Sarah could answer. "Thought I'd rest my horse and wet my throat." Marcus grunted, already losing interest. His attention swung to Sarah instead, and she braced herself. "That table in the corner's a mess. You getting lazy on me, girl?" "No, sir. I'll see to it right away." She moved to comply, but not fast enough. Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. fingers digging into the tender flesh hard enough to leave new bruises atop old ones. "When I tell you to do something, you jump. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Can't hear you." "Yes, sir." Louder this time, though it cost her something to force the words out. He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling. She caught herself against a table, ignored the snickers from the men watching, and began clearing away the dirty glasses and cards scattered across the surface. Her wrist throbbed. Tomorrow it would be purple. When she returned to the bar, she noticed that James's expression had changed. The sadness in his eyes had been joined by something harder, something that glinted like steel catching sunlight. But he said nothing, just returned to his whiskey. The incident should have ended there. In the past 3 years, Sarah had endured countless such moments, and the pattern was always the same: pain, humiliation, silence. The world kept turning, and she kept surviving, because surviving was all she had left. But James didn't leave when his whiskey was gone. He ordered another, then a third, and as evening shadows began to stretch across the floorboards, he was still there, still watching with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. Marcus noticed, of course. He noticed everything, especially anything that might challenge his dominion over his small, brutal kingdom. "You planning to grow roots at my bar, stranger? Comfortable spot," James replied evenly, "and the company's pleasant." Sarah's blood ran cold. "No, don't do this. Don't notice me. Don't defend me. It only makes things worse." Marcus's face darkened. "You talking about my wife?" "I'm talking about the whiskey." James's tone remained mild, but there was iron underneath now. "Though I couldn't help but notice that a lady deserves better treatment than I've seen her receive." The saloon went quiet. Even the card players stopped their games, sensing the shift in the air like animals before an earthquake. Sarah wanted to disappear, to sink through the floorboards and vanish into the earth below. This stranger didn't understand. He didn't know that there was no rescue coming, no salvation possible. There was only survival, and even that was never guaranteed. Marcus took a step toward the bar, his massive hands curling into fists. "You got some nerve coming into my establishment and telling me how to handle my own wife." "Not telling you anything," James said, still seated, still apparently calm, "just making an observation." "Then observe this." Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed Sarah by the hair, yanking her head back hard enough to make her gasp. "This is mine. Paid good money for her from a father who was happy to be rid of her, and I'll treat her however I damn well please. You got a problem with that. You can get the hell out of my saloon." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes from the pain, but she'd learned long ago not to cry out. Crying out only made him angrier, made the punishment worse. She fixed her gaze on the ceiling and waited for it to be over, the way she always did. She heard rather than saw James stand up. The scrape of his stool against the floor was loud in the silence. "Let her go." 2 words, spoken quietly but carrying absolute conviction. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Or what? Or I'll make you." What happened next happened fast. Marcus released Sarah and lunged toward James with the speed of a man who'd won countless bar fights through sheer size and ferocity. But James wasn't there anymore. He sidestepped with a grace that spoke of experience, and when Marcus turned, confused by the empty space where his target should have been, James's fist connected with his jaw in a clean, precise strike. Marcus staggered but didn't fall. He was too big for that, too used to absorbing punishment. He roared and charged again, and this time James didn't dodge. He caught Marcus's arm, twisted with a practiced motion, and used the bigger man's momentum against him. There was a meaty thud as Marcus hit the floor, hard enough to rattle bottles behind the bar. The fight, if it could even be called that, was over in less than a minute. Marcus tried to rise, and James put him down again with another economical strike. On the third attempt, James placed a boot on Marcus's chest and looked down at him with those gray eyes gone cold as winter stone. "You're going to leave her alone," James said. "You're going to apologize for every hand you've laid on her, and then you're going to walk out that door and keep walking. You understand me?" Marcus spat blood and curses, but there was fear in his eyes now. Fear that Sarah recognized because she'd spent 3 years trying to appease it, unsuccessfully. "I said, do you understand me? You can't, she's my wife. She's a human being, and you've treated her worse than a dog." James pressed down slightly with his boot, and Marcus wheezed. "Now you've got 2 choices. You can accept my offer and leave with your pride bruised but your body intact. Or you can keep arguing, and I'll make sure you leave on a stretcher. Your call." Sarah stood frozen behind the bar, unable to process what she was witnessing. In 3 years, no one had intervened. No one had cared enough or been brave enough, or perhaps they'd simply understood that in a town this small, in a territory this wild, a man's authority over his wife was as unquestionable as sunrise. But here was this stranger, this cowboy with sad eyes and fast hands, dismantling that authority like it was nothing more than a house of cards. Marcus must have seen something in James's face that convinced him, because he finally nodded, the fight draining out of him. James stepped back and allowed him to rise. Marcus lurched to his feet, wiped blood from his mouth, and cast one last look at Sarah, a look filled with such venom that she instinctively stepped backward. "This ain't over," Marcus snarled. "Yes," James said quietly, "it is." And perhaps it was the finality in those words, or perhaps Marcus's survival instinct finally overcame his rage, but he turned and stumbled toward the door. The other patrons parted for him like water around a stone, and then he was gone, disappeared into the gathering darkness outside. The saloon remained silent for a long moment. Then, gradually, conversations resumed, cards were shuffled, drinks were poured. The men seemed to have collectively decided to pretend nothing unusual had occurred, which was perhaps the wisest course of action. Sarah realized she was shaking. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bar, her knees threatening to give out beneath her. 3 years of accumulated fear and pain and hopelessness were trying to escape all at once, and she didn't know how to contain them. James approached the bar slowly, carefully, as if she were a wild thing that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The laugh that escaped her was jagged and broken. All right. She hadn't been all right since the day her father had sold her to Marcus to settle a gambling debt. She hadn't been all right since the first time Marcus's fist had connected with her ribs, or the second, or the 100th. "I don't," her voice cracked. "Why did you do that?" James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "I had a sister once. Her husband treated her the way yours treats you. I was young, didn't know how to help her, didn't understand that I should have tried anyway. One day he went too far, and she didn't wake up the next morning." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "I swore then that if I ever saw another man laying hands on a woman, I'd stop it. Doesn't matter if I'm passing through or putting down roots. Some things you can't walk away from and still live with yourself." "He'll come back," Sarah whispered. "You don't know him. He won't let this stand. He'll come back and then I'll deal with him again." James's tone was matter of fact. "But I don't think he will. Men like that, they're cowards at heart. They only fight people who can't fight back. Now that he knows someone's watching, someone who won't tolerate his behavior, he'll move on to easier prey." Sarah wanted to believe him, but hope was dangerous. Hope was the thing that had been beaten out of her over 3 long years. "You can't stay here forever. You said yourself you were just passing through." "Well," James settled back onto his stool and motioned for another whiskey, "maybe I'll pass through a little slower than I planned. This town seems like it could use a blacksmith, and I've got experience with that trade. Saw an old forge on my way in that looks abandoned." She poured his drink with hands that were still shaking, unable to meet his eyes. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Don't need to know you deserve better than what you've been getting." He paused, then added gently, "What's your name?" "Sarah." It felt strange to say it aloud. Marcus never used her name, just girl or woman, or worse things when he was particularly angry. "Sarah." He said it like it mattered, like she mattered. "I'm James Colton. Pleased to make your acquaintance." The formal courtesy of it, the simple human decency, broke something inside her. Tears began streaming down her face, silent at first, then accompanied by sobs that shook her entire body. 3 years of tears that she'd held back because crying only made Marcus angrier. 3 years of pain and fear and loneliness, all coming out at once. James didn't try to touch her or comfort her with empty platitudes. He simply sat there, a steady presence, while she wept. When she finally regained control, he slid a clean handkerchief across the bar. "Thank you," she managed. "Nothing to thank me for." But there was. There was everything to thank him for, even if the words wouldn't come. The days that followed were strange, suspended between fear and the first fragile shoots of hope. Marcus didn't return to the saloon. Word spread through town that he'd taken off for parts unknown, which should have been a relief, but instead left Sarah waiting for the other boot to drop. She knew men like Marcus. They didn't just disappear. They festered and plotted and came back when you least expected it. James made good on his word about the forge. He rented the old building and set about repairing it, and within a week he'd established himself as the town's new blacksmith. Sarah would see him sometimes through the saloon windows, working the bellows, hammering iron into horseshoes and tools, and all the things a growing town needed. He'd wave when he caught her looking, and she'd duck her head, still uncertain about this new reality. He took his evening meals at the saloon, always sitting at the same spot at the bar, always treating her with that same quiet courtesy. Other men in town noticed and began following his example, as if his respect gave them permission to see her as something other than Marcus's property. The wandering hands stopped, the crude comments dried up. It was like living in a different world. 2 weeks after Marcus's departure, Sarah was closing up the saloon when she heard footsteps on the porch. Her heart seized. This was it. This was when Marcus would return, probably drunk, definitely angry, ready to reclaim what he considered his and punish her for his humiliation. She grabbed the rifle from behind the bar, Marcus's rifle, ironically, and leveled it at the door. "Who's there?" "Just me, Sarah." James's voice, calm and reassuring. Saw the light on late and wanted to make sure everything was all right. She lowered the rifle with a shaky exhale and unlocked the door. James stood on the porch, still in his work clothes, soot streaked across his forearms. "Jumpy tonight," he observed. "Every night." She stepped aside to let him in, then locked the door behind him. "I keep thinking he'll come back. And if he does, you'll handle it. You're stronger than you think." Sarah wanted to argue, to tell him that strength was a luxury she'd lost somewhere in the brutality of the past 3 years. But there was something in his eyes, belief, maybe, or just stubborn insistence, that made her pause. The fulfillment, strength isn't about not feeling afraid. When it comes, it's about getting up every morning despite the fear. You've been doing that for 3 years. That takes more strength than most people ever need to find. They stood there in the dim lamplight, and Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not healing, that would take far longer than 2 weeks, but perhaps the beginning of it. Like the first warm day after an endless winter, so fragile you're afraid to acknowledge it in case it disappears. "Would you like some coffee?" she heard herself ask. "I was about to make some for myself." James smiled, and it transformed his whole face, chasing away some of the sadness that lived in his eyes. "Coffee sounds perfect." They sat at one of the tables, drinking coffee and talking. James told her about his travels, about the places he'd seen and the people he'd met. She told him about her life before Marcus, when her mother was still alive, and there was music in her house. Small revelations, carefully offered, like gifts exchanged between people learning to trust. "What will you do now?" James asked eventually. "The saloon technically belongs to Marcus. He could come back and claim it." "I know." Sarah had been trying not to think about it. "I suppose I'll have to find work elsewhere. Maybe as a seamstress or a cook, or—" James said carefully, "You could run the saloon yourself. Place like this needs someone steady at the helm. You know the business better than anyone. A woman running a saloon, people would talk. People talk anyway, might as well give them something worthwhile to discuss." He paused. "I'm not saying it would be easy, but you could do it. Build something that's yours on your own terms." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. To be her own person, to make her own decisions, to live without constantly bracing for the next blow. It seemed impossible, a dream too distant to grasp. But James was looking at her like he could see that future already, like it was inevitable rather than impossible, and something in his certainty made her want to believe. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." Marcus didn't return that night, or the next, or the one after that. Weeks became a month, and then 2 months, and gradually Sarah began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her nightmare was truly over. She filed the paperwork to claim abandonment of the saloon, and though it raised eyebrows in town, no one challenged it. Having James Colton quietly supporting her claim probably helped. She renamed the place Sarah's Saloon, which felt both terrifying and right. She made changes: better food, cleaner floors, a strict policy about how her female employees would be treated. Some of the rougher customers drifted away to other establishments, but they were replaced by families, by travelers who appreciated a safe, welcoming environment. James remained a constant presence, always there if she needed him, but never overbearing, never trying to control or possess. He fixed things that broke, mediated disputes, and scared off trouble with nothing more than his reputation as the man who'd run off Marcus Brennan. But mostly he was just there, steady as a lighthouse, while Sarah slowly remembered how to be a person rather than a victim. Spring came to the territory, bringing wildflowers and warm winds. Sarah stood on the saloon's porch one evening, watching the sun set over the distant mountains, and realized she was happy. Not just content, not just surviving, but genuinely happy. The realization was so unexpected it brought tears to her eyes. "Penny for your thoughts." James had come up beside her without her noticing, which spoke to how safe she'd come to feel around him. "Just thinking how different everything is now." She wiped at her eyes. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine anything beyond getting through each day. Now I'm planning for next year, thinking about expanding the kitchen, maybe hiring another cook." "You've built something good here, Sarah. Should be proud of yourself." "I couldn't have done it without you." James shook his head. "You could have. Maybe would have taken longer, maybe would have been harder, but you'd have done it. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She turned to look at him, this mysterious cowboy who'd walked through her door and changed everything. Why did you really stay? The truth, not just about your sister." He was quiet for a long time, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Because I was tired of riding away, tired of moving from town to town, never putting down roots, never letting anyone get close. When I saw you that first day, saw what you were enduring, I realized I had a choice. I could ride away like I always did, carry that regret along with all the others, or I could stay and try to do something that mattered. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. "If that's all right with you." Sarah thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, so beaten down and hopeless that she couldn't imagine a future beyond the next day. That girl would never have believed she could stand here, free and happy, with a business of her own and a friend who saw her as an equal rather than property. "It's more than all right," she said. "It's everything." They stood together on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in 3 long years: safe. Not because James would protect her, though she knew he would, but because she'd learned to protect herself. She'd found her own strength, her own voice, her own ability to build a life worth living. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments when the old fears came rushing back. But she wouldn't face them alone, and she wouldn't face them as a victim anymore. She was Sarah, owner of Sarah's Saloon, survivor of 3 years of beatings and abuse, and against all odds, against everything that should have broken her, she'd found her way back to herself. And that, she thought as James's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, was worth more than all the gold in the territory. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.